Hello everyone and welcome to Beginner's Code. Today we are going to learn how we can use Flask logic, APIs and object-oriented programming to create a currency converter. Okay, so I have created a new folder called Currency Converter and opened it up in Visual Studio Code and also in my terminal. So the first thing we're going to do is create a virtual environment to install our dependencies. So we will say -3 -m venv, and then we'll call it myenv. Once that's done, we'll just activate it. So we'll say source myenv bin activate, and then we're just going to install Flask and requests. So whilst these are installing, we'll come over to Visual Studio Code and we will create a folder called templates. Inside here, we will just create an index.html file. And then in the root of the currency converter folder, we will create a new file, we'll call it app.py, and we'll also create another one called models.py. So the models is going to hold all of our object-oriented programming or our classes. The app will hold the logic for different routes, and then the index will be our front end. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll create a class. Well, we'll just double check that everything's installed correctly. Perfect. So we will come over to app just to make sure that the Flask is working as we expect. So here we'll say from Flask, import Flask, render template, and request. And then we'll just say app is equal to Flask, and then we'll pass in __ name. And then we'll say if name double equal to main. We'll just say app.run and we'll pass in debug true. And then here we'll just create a decorator for the root. This will just be a / and we'll just say def index, and we will just return render template of index.html. And then here we'll create a heading 1 that will just say hello world. And then if we run our app.py, we should see no errors. So we come over to here. And if we take this URL and then head over to Google Chrome, we now see a hello world running on the link that we've just, the development server that's just been set up using Flask. So now if we come back over to Visual Studio Code, we can remove that and head over to our models. So this is going to handle the API call and also the actual conversion of the currency. So we will import requests, and then here we'll just create a class and we'll call it currency converter. And when this is initialized, we want to pass in self and then the API URLs, because obviously we're going to need different API URLs depending on which currency we want to convert from, whether it's the pound or the dollar. So we'll say self.API URLs, we'll set that equal to API URLs, and we'll say self.rates, and this will just be an empty dictionary. So now we want to create a function that will actually handle the API call and retrieve the rates. So we'll say def fetch rates, and we'll say pass in self. Now we need to loop through the API URL items, and then we will do something using requests. So we'll make an API call to the items. So we'll say for currency URL in self.API URLs.items. And then here we'll just say response is equal to requests.get, and then we'll pass in the URL. So this is going to be an API call to the URL that's passed in when we create this currency converter class. So we'll say if the response status code is equal to 200, so if it's good, if it's all okay, then we'll say self.rates, and then we'll pass in the index of currency. So this will create a key. So it will be Great British Pounds, and then we'll set that equal to response.json, and then we'll get the rates. We'll pass in an empty dictionary as well. And then we'll say else, and we'll just raise an exception that says error fetching exchange rates for currency, just in case we type in GBP, but instead of doing GBP, we do GBO or something like that, because then we'll throw an error because there won't be a currency for that. Now we need to have a function that will actually convert from one currency to another currency, and we also need to take in a specific amount. So we'll say def convert, and here we'll pass in self again so that we can access the attributes that are passed back. And we'll say amount, we'll say from currency and to currency, because we need a starting currency and a target currency. So if the from currency is equal to the to currency, so if you're converting from dollars to dollars, then we'll just return the amount because the exchange rate will be exactly the same. And then we'll say if from currency is equal to USD, and we'll say base amount is equal to amount. Then we'll say else base amount is equal to amount divided by self.rates with the key of USD. And then we'll say get from currency, and then we'll pass in 1 as well. And now we'll say if to currency is equal to USD, then we will return the base amount. And then if it passes all of those, then we will say return base amount times by self.rates of USD dot get, and then to currency, and we'll also pass in 1. So now we have our logic of handling the different currency exchanges. We now need to head over to our app.py, and then here we will just we will import our currency converter that we've just created. So we'll say from models import currency converter, and then underneath our app we want to create the API URLs. And now these are obviously going to be the same because we're using the same base URL but with a different endpoint depending on the currency. So we'll just say base URL is equal to HTTPS, and we're going to use api.exchangerate-api.com, and then we'll pass in v4 and then latest, and we'll leave a trailing slash at the end, and then we'll create a constant called API URLs, and we'll set this equal to a dictionary. So the first one will be USD, and then we'll say base URL, and then we'll just concatenate USD to the end. And then we'll say GBP, and we'll say base URL, and then we'll concatenate GBP, and then Euro, and again base URL, and concatenate Euro. So now we have our API routes set up. We can actually create our converter or instantiate our converter and pass in these API URLs. So we'll say converter is equal to currency converter and then API URLs. So now we have our currency converter imported into our app logic. We just need to actually work out how we can output the data from the models into our index.html file. So here we will just create we'll create a result and an error, and they will both be set to none because then we can update those later on as we work through this logic. So we'll say result is equal to none and error is equal to none. And then in here we are going to be using a request method. So we are going to be checking the post and the get. So up inside this app.root, we need to use the methods, and we'll pass in get, and we'll also pass in post. And then here we'll just say if request.method is equal to post. So if a form essentially is being submitted, then we will say the amount is equal to, and we'll use a float just in case someone puts in 0.45 or something like that. And then we'll say request.form.get, and then we'll say amount, and we'll also make that 0. And then, so that will round to the nearest. And then we'll say from currency is equal to request.form.get, and then from currency, so that will get the currency depending on like a select drop down. And we'll say to currency, and then this will be exactly the same, but the name will be to currency. And we're just going to try to use the converter, and we'll say fetch rates, and then we'll say result is equal to converter.convert, pass in the amount, the from currency, and the to currency. And then we will create an exception. So we'll say accept exception as E, and then we'll just say error is equal to the string of E. Okay, so that is our post method. And then for the get method, we just want to return render template. And then if there is so if this has all passed and this is all okay, then we are also going to pass in the result and the error. So we'll say result is equal to result, and error is equal to error. So if it's the get method, we'll render the index.html file, and we are just going to pass in these two none variables. Whereas if it's the post method, we'll render the index.html file, and we are going to either pass in the result from here, or we're going to pass in the error, depending on whether or not we've been able to actually fetch the result, fetch the rates. So now we have this logic set up. We need a way to actually create and output or input different data depending on what we want. So we'll create an index.html, and then inside that we'll create a HTML5 boilerplate. So currency converter will be the title, and we're just going to link to Bootstrap. bootstrapcdn.com, and then we'll say /bootstrap/4.5.2 CSS and bootstrap.min.css. And then inside the body, we'll create a div with a class of container and a class of margin top 5. We'll create a heading 1 with a margin bottom that just says currency converter. And then we're going to create a form with the method of post. We can remove the action because everything's going to be handled by Flask's logic. So we'll say div form group, and then we'll create a label for amount that just has amount. And then we're going to create an input which is a type of number. And then we'll create the name that just says amount and the ID that says amount. And we'll create a class that just says form control. So these are built-in classes from Bootstrap that will just help style this form. Then we'll create another div for form group and a label which is for from currency. And then we'll just say from, and an a select which has the name of from currency, an ID of from currency, and a class of form control. And then here we'll create an option which is USD, and then we will do the same here, and that will just be euro, and then here will be British pounds. And now we'll copy this and then change the from currencies to be to currency. And we'll change that to the to. And then outside of this div, we will just create a button that has a type of submit. And we will say class of btn primary. And then in here, we'll just say convert. So now if we head over to our terminal, make sure everything's running still, we can now go over to Google Chrome and refresh, and we now have a form that will take in a number value, and we can adjust what we want to convert to and from. If we click convert, it won't actually output the results yet. So what we need to do is head back over to here, and then under the form, we'll say if result is not none. And then inside this if, we will just create a div with a margin top of 4. We'll say heading 3, converted amount, and then we'll pass in the result. And then we will say else if the error is not none. And then we will create another div with a margin top of 4. And we'll say heading 3 with a text of danger. And we'll just pass in the error. Now there's not an easy way to test the error unless we create a spelling mistake in this exchange rate space URL. So we'll test that out shortly. But now we have all this HTML sorted. If we come back over to Chrome and refresh, and if I say the amount is 1,000, we're going to go from dollars to pounds, and we have converted amount 774, so that is pounds that we will get from $1,000. And if I put in 1,000 and we go from dollars to euros, we should get, yes, so 919. So the conversion is actually a lot better for the euro than it is for the pound if you're coming from the dollar. So now if we come back over to Visual Studio Code, and in the app we just change this, so it's just exchange rate -AP, and then we refresh here, we have our error message output here. Now it's obviously not the most reader friendly or user friendly, so we would probably be better off changing this to be conditional depending on what the actual error message is. But yeah, this is a working currency converter. Hopefully this has helped you grasp how we can use object-oriented programming, APIs and Flask logic to create a very simple currency converter. If you learned something today, please hit that like button and make sure you subscribe to see new videos coming. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.